I don't know. This fucking Zoom thing never works. Okay. Alright, so this is the first part of my webisode. It's called AKA Wiki, AKA the Wikipedia documentary, AKA that has nothing to do with WikiLeaks, AKA The Truth, AKA Assange, AKA God, Scott Vickers Heffernan, also known as Mitlaufer no more, character proxemics in modern phraseology, aka How I Learned Self-Superficiality and Gave Up Stanley Kubrick Films Before Midnight, aka Gremlins, aka A Sound, aka aka How's That, aka Who Did What in a Postmodern Who Now, in the How Now, aka Hashtag Reference, aka Number Symbol, aka Twitter, aka Stupid, aka Not Me, aka Hemingway Napalm, What I Had in My Morning Shake, aka How I Take It, aka Absinthe, aka With Fucking Champagne. Also known as my self-contained history on wiki self-referencing self-referentiality for beginners, or ... or aka ... or aka ... aka ... aka ... aka full working title is still hazy, aka but this is what remains of the original draft, aka is never before seen, so aka worth your $50 extra, aka got pirated the next day, aka so not, aka reprinted herein. In relation to both Einstein's theory and to the law of averages, Scott Heffernan Vickers wrote an entire wiki entry for his groundbreaking essay, Self-Referentiality for Beginners, or aka the precursor, aka My Life in 5,000 Words, or so, by Scott Heffernan, aka Scott Vickers Heffernan, aka Heffernan Vickers, aka Scott the Hefmensch, aka Scott the Hef McHef, the guy who smoked too much, almost kvetched then retched, Vickerson, aka I can't believe I almost entitled an entire biography with an entire list of AKAs and totally fuck with the literary Illuminati, aka Lockett, and I, aka mostly Lockett, aka got an A on my paper, aka and yet managed, aka to still bleed, aka breathe, aka that was a mistake, aka get over it, it happens, okay, aka moving on, aka a cliche, aka a hang-up, aka a clique, also known as oblique, aka over, also known as trickle down, also known as Reaganomics, aka Green Death, aka not weed, also known as the bad kind of green death, as opposed to the good kind, which is weed, also known as weed, also known as over, also known as trickle down, also known as Reaganomics, also known as green death, aka not weed, aka the bad kind, aka self-perpetuating cycles, somehow manages to ever hope to come to anything understanding of self in such a simplistic structure, also known as Vic Hefferson and his merry pranksters, also known as that time I fondled my 12-year-old babysitter and she giggled alongside me, also known as Mick Vickerson, aka Scotty Two Hotties for Scotty's Whittle Softies, aka wait, didn't that guy die last year, aka oh that guy, yeah I heard of him, aka he was such a loon back in school, yeah, Guten Tag, aka Guten Tag, otherwise known as that guy, otherwise known as no, not that guy, otherwise known as which one, otherwise known as that guy next to him, otherwise known as oh that guy, otherwise known as, see, that guy theory, otherwise known as it's always the other guy, unless it's bad, aka movie making for dime store raised hoodlums, otherwise known as me, otherwise known as with Stand By Me, otherwise known as Benny King, otherwise known as Stephen King, otherwise known as, sorry, I lost that little part, oh shit, with Stand By Me, aka Stephen King, aka Benny King, aka A Great Combo, aka Steak Frites, otherwise known as Steak Fright, otherwise known as Stage Fright, otherwise known as who? Otherwise known as the skill. You know, the one where every one of his thoughts becomes a fish that can then eat and breathe on itself, otherwise known as the lover of all things, Crisscross. even wearing his own clothes, otherwise known as his digs. Otherwise known as whatever his mom's bought him because he was like 13 himself, otherwise known as weak-ass nigga, otherwise known as insert further ghetto intonations and some type of John Singleton droopy end with Sandra Bullock and some Asian kid, otherwise known as The Blind Side, otherwise known as the guy who's seen everything you have but owns a pirated fan-edit Redux version you haven't seen, Mick Vickerson, aka Mick Vickery of the Mix, aka Irish, aka Potato Head, aka Toys Not People, otherwise known as Happy Meal, otherwise known as, oh yeah, I heard about him, he's the one who fucked what's-his-face, right? Otherwise known as just kidding, otherwise known as, why do you all keep looking at me? Otherwise known as, I'm just kidding, I have no idea who you mean. Otherwise known as, am I getting to you yet? Otherwise known as Not the Fucking Brand New Song or The Band Mom, aka Brand New The Band Mom, aka So Uncool Mom, aka I Know, right? Aka Death to Text Talkers, aka, oh, you got that right, Existence, bitches. Sorry, the guy who's seen everything, aka the self-referentialness. Okay, here we go. This is the end of it. Why do y'all keep talking at me? I'm kidding, like I have no idea of you, me. Okay, aka, why do y'all keep looking at me? Aka, I'm just kidding, aka, I'm just kidding, I have no idea who you mean, aka, have I got you yet? AKA, not the fucking brand new song or the band mom. AKA, brand new the band mom. AKA, so uncool mom. AKA, I know, right? AKA, death to text talkers. AKA, existence. My stand. AKA, right here. AKA, and there you have it. My presentation on the self-referentialness of intangent art in an infantile study of circularity, otherwise known as the guy who lost his wallet, otherwise known as not once, but 87 fucking times in 1 year, otherwise known as the bad year, otherwise known as the big sleep, otherwise known as the year to end all other comparative years of comparability in the first fucking place. So there, me making goony goo goo noises like Eddie fucking Murphy. AKA, of course, raw motherfuckers, AKA, I don't be trickling on nothing, AKA, the king of all urine references from herein, otherwise known as, give me my master's papers, otherwise known as, I'm ready for more, otherwise known as Chuck Norris, otherwise known as Bruce Lee, otherwise known as Except Afraid of Gay Boy Scouts, otherwise known as Gay Scouts, otherwise known as so much less cool than Bruce Lee, AKA Chuck, AKA Norris, AKA The Joke, otherwise known as, in order for my presentation to become real, like the imaginary worlds of Pynchon and Nabokov, I needed a community to make it viral. Thus, when it got released on Wikipedia, I needed to provide its own self-referentiality of self-legitimizing itself as a project, which in itself was engineered to raise awareness about plagiarism and people using too much fucking WikiLeaks. Otherwise known as, but the entire thing is actually an ironic comment on the self-referentiality of art, otherwise known as, for my greatest inspiration, Dr. Christopher Lockett, otherwise known as Mom, otherwise known as, also, otherwise known as the documentary that finally conveyed that fucking moment when I was on liquid acid and they strapped me to a hospital gurney. Yes, that actually did happen. Otherwise known as, I still have another how many fucking words? Otherwise known as 488 minus 498, otherwise known as, oh wait, no, minus 4 to 500, otherwise known as or so. Otherwise known as cream of some. Otherwise known as young guy. Otherwise known as the man of 1,000 AKs. AKA dude with a lot of guns, right? AKA technically it was more like 18,000. AKA and change, aka we lack it, they die, aka our kids, aka figurative philosophy for preteens, otherwise known as pre-pubes, otherwise known as pre-tubes, otherwise known as otherwise known as wait. Are we still talking about AKs? Otherwise known as no, otherwise known as just kidding. Oh shit. Okay, otherwise known as 640 no, 50 no, 53 is 656? C note, otherwise known as note, otherwise known as a Kia? What, you mean like a fucking car? For Christ's sakes. Otherwise known as yes, Mom, but a lot faster. That one's for you, Mom. Otherwise known as my mom's actually a fucking super lady who's super brilliant, by the way. Otherwise known as